Welcome back. Solving a murder case can be a daunting task. When you're the only homicide detective in town, daunting just doesn't cover it. For example, police in Palmetto are still trying to solve the case of Club Elite in Palmetto. Almost 6 years ago, 2 people were killed, 22 wounded when gunmen opened fire just after midnight on a Saturday morning. September 12th, there are other unsolved cases in the small Manatee County community as well. And joining us for more on what can be done to help close those cases is Chad Euler, a detective with the Palmetto Police Department, and James Lawrence, who served as police commissioner for Nassau County in New York, where I went to school, the Harvard of Hempstead, Hofstra University. But Detective, let me start with you. And Dwayne reported on the Club Elite case. Where do we stand with it right now?
Well, right now, unfortunately, we still haven't closed it with any arrests. Like mentioned previously, it's been 6 years. It is frustrating, especially, and I've mentioned this before, when you have a case like that, where you have a shooting at a nightclub.
A lot of people saw it. A
lot of people, not just necessarily people at the club, but you have businesses nearby. You have people passing by in their vehicles. It's in a relatively busy street. To still not have anything so much as a vehicle description is really frustrating. You would think by now I would at least have that.
Commissioner, I bet you have seen a lot of cases like that in Nassau County and New York City, where you also worked.
Yes, of course. And as Chad said, someone saw something, and whether they're holding back or they're afraid to come, is one thing. But this is why I think community policing is so important. For the police to interact with people in their community prior to things like this happen, so people feel comfortable with coming forward and lending a hand in solving these crimes.
We've seen so many cases like this, and I've covered cases where where people don't want to talk to the police.
Sure.
There's a lot of other things going on.
Right.
Does that play into that here?
Oh, sure. Yeah, and that's something we run into on not just this case, but several cases where a witness is key, especially if you don't have a case that's leaving a lot of physical evidence behind or anything else that gives you any traction on a case. You need those witnesses. I mean, that's something you almost can't do without.
Given that, would you have been helped, or could you use a little extra help?
Oh, absolutely, sure.
I want to get into this more in the next segment, but when a case like this happens, where you have 2 dead and over 20 shot, how does it fall to just one person to lead an investigation like that?
Right. Well, it doesn't. I mean, there's a lead detective, but even on that night, prior to, and currently now, we have a homicide unit that's multi-agency that's ran out of the sheriff's office, which includes Bradenton PD, Palmetto, even the beach communities participate. It really helps out a lot. But even prior to that, when Club Elite took place, I mean, there was tons of resources from the sheriff's office. I even had federal agency personnel there. So when we need it, especially early on, when you've got a big scene like that, you do get assistance.
But at some point, the primary shift in terms of investigator just went to you.
Eventually, things are going to thin out as far as the help from other agencies, because they have their own things to do too and their own cases to work. So you're the lead, and everything's going to come through you, and eventually it's going to come down to you.
And Commissioner, in your experience, it's a little bit different, because when something like this happens, let's say in Nassau County in New York, that is initially in the jurisdiction of one particular local police department, the county comes in to help.
Yes, yes. We had a top-notch homicide squad, first of all, and it would be all hands anytime a homicide occurred. So you not only have the detectives that may be assigned to those local smaller police departments, but then you'd also have the local precinct squad detectives and the homicide squads all working together to solve that case.
And obviously Nassau County is a much bigger area than this,
yes,
and has a lot more crime and a lot more murders, but it doesn't just fall to one person in a unit to handle a case, for instance, the size of this one.
No, it doesn't, but Nassau County has 1.4 million people, and our police department is probably a lot larger than a lot of departments down here. And the idea, I keep coming back to this thing about community policing, because the community is an integral part of solving any case.
All right, we're going to pick up more on that
yes,
in the next half hour. We are just getting started, and we will pick up the discussion right after we check the weather statements. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the high number of cold cases in Palmetto and how limited resources could affect the police department's ability to solve them. Our guests tonight are Chad Euler, a detective at the Palmetto Police Department, and James Lawrence, a former police commissioner for Nassau County in New York. And Chad, that's the obvious question. Does lack of resources impede your ability to solve the cases that are on your plate?
I would say it's always better to have more. You know, more is better as far as resources when you have a case, especially early on, when you have a lot to do and you have a lot of different directions to go. So it's always going to help. I don't know that lack of resources has kept us from being able to close any cases. I wouldn't go as far as to say that, but it definitely kind of speeds things up. You know, the more eyes to look at something, the more ideas that come in. You know, that's never a bad thing.
So what happened? I mean, obviously you have what you're working on today and the recent criminal cases that have hot leads, but I would imagine some of these other cases, like the Elite nightclub case, I mean, you can only react to so much. You know, you can almost only have so much on your plate.
Sure, sure. Right, and especially the longer time goes, as more time passes, and you have new cases that come up, and you know, those get the adequate amount of attention. So it's important to always keep your mind on these and don't forget about them. And we don't. Actually, just as recently as the last couple weeks, I've gotten a couple calls on Club Elite. And that's something that's impressive, because I've gone years without hearing anything about Elite. So I don't forget about it. It never comes off the desk. It's always on your mind, and you're always keeping your ears open. You're always asking. And then, like I said, you get a couple of contacts from people recently that kind of gives you a little bit more hope.
Hopefully, us doing this show tonight will get your phone ringing.
Absolutely, yes.
Commissioner, I would imagine that on a larger scale, you have had to deal with these situations. You may have overseen a larger homicide department, but you also have to make decisions in terms of in the cases that you have to work on and what's hot. But my question to you is, have you also faced in these larger departments budgetary pressures where, you know, when budgets get slashed or get pressure, that you have to make personnel decisions in terms of how many detectives you have working on how many cases at one time?
Of course. When I joined Nassau as the police commissioner, Nassau County was in the middle of a budget crisis, and the numbers of members of the police department were dwindling. Usually the uniformed force in Nassau, or historically the uniformed force in Nassau County, was running around 3,000. And they were trending down toward about 2,400. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but somebody has to replace the work that's being done by those officers that you lose. And as Chad said, you know, more is always better in policing. If you have 10 homicide squads, you know, out there, you know, knocking on doors, you're probably going to have a chance to get a better result.
Is there a number that you could put your arms around in terms of how many cases a detective can have at one time in order to efficiently be able to work on them?
You know, I wouldn't put a number on it, because, you know, especially in the case of the squads that I've oversaw, you know, even though a detective might be assigned a case, they work together, and they're not continuously working on that same case. So they'd be working on a number of cases.
And the difference in New York was the county handled the homicide investigations.
In Nassau County, the county homicide squad oversaw the investigation of homicide.
Now, Chad, you mentioned that a deliberate decision was made back in 2013 by the county to pool the officers, homicide officers, together. How does that work?
It works out really great, actually. In 2013, we started a multi-agency homicide unit that consists of a handful of Manatee County Sheriff's detectives, homicide detectives, that are all experienced homicide detectives, a Bradenton PD homicide detective, myself from Palmetto PD, and even there's detectives from the beach communities, the police departments out there, who also contribute to it. We work out of the same office. I mean, my cubicle is right across from a Bradenton guy and right next to an MSO detective. So it allows for a quicker flow of information. Maybe these guys from MSO know certain people that I didn't know from Palmetto, and the other way around. Information goes from detective to detective, from agency to agency, a lot quicker without any sort of red tape or any delay. And everybody's experienced, and when you get new cases, you know, you have a lead, and then you have everybody else in the homicide unit backing them up.
And I want to draw a real distinction here, because there is a difference, is there not, between a cold case and an unsolved case?
Right.
What's the difference?
Well, as far as the definition for me, an unsolved case, a cold case is a case that truly we don't have any active leads. We don't have any new information coming in. There hasn't been any new information coming in, and there doesn't seem to be anything on the horizon, and nothing gets inactivated. You know, as far as the Palmetto Police Department or homicides don't get inactivated, they still stay open and active. But the reality is there's just nothing coming in.
So the Club Elite case, what category would that fall into?
It's not cold. That would not be cold. It's an unsolved murder. It's an unsolved double murder, unfortunately. But I wouldn't label that as cold for a second.
Commissioner, do larger departments have the luxury, if you will, to have separate cold case squads that once it reaches that determination that nothing new is coming on, you still have another unit in there who could work on these cases full time?
Well, in Nassau County, we didn't have a cold case squad. But as Chad said, you don't close homicide cases. They're open, whether cold or not. New York City had a cold case squad, and they had good results. But, you know, here it raises that point again. More is better. When you have the personnel, there are a lot of things that you can do.
And we're living in a time where budgets on the local and state and federal level are being squeezed hard.
Yeah, being squeezed hard, but this is where the community comes. That's why communities should be involved with their police departments. Right. They should know what's going on in their community police-wise, and they should have some say in how their communities are policed. And part of being policed is the numbers.
And we will pick that up when we come back. Let's take a break, and when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, the local response to climate change. Welcome back. For smaller agencies like the Palmetto Police Department, it can be difficult to close homicide cases. What more can be done to help get justice for the families of the victims? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. So, Commissioner, after listening to this conversation, what do you want people to walk away from it with?
Well, you know, I want them to walk away with the feeling that it's very important for people to get involved with their police departments and to know what's going on in their community, and that they can play a role, not only when it comes budget time. You can't increase personnel without increasing the money in the budget.
Well, those are two different things, because, and unfortunately, because of a lot of things that have happened over the last few years, they're, you know, sometimes members of the community don't believe that they're going to get a fair shake, and I know that's a whole other show, but that does play a whole role.
But you see, but when you're involved, when you know your police before things happen, you'll be surprised at how better things result.
Chad, do you hope people watching this tonight who may know something about Club Elite or the other homicides that we talked about say, look, you know, it's been 6 years. Obviously, you saw members of the victims' families who are, you know, you lose a kid, you never forget about this. Sure. Might call your office and give you that one key piece of information that may help you.
No, absolutely. I mean, I always hope that. I mean, it's like I had mentioned previously, we had a couple calls just recently in the last few weeks regarding Club Elite. The more the better. If there ends up being nothing, we'll sift through those. We'll weed through that. Just if you've got something, call. Sometimes it's difficult for them to do, and they have their reasons. Just try to look past those reasons, you know, and think about the victims' families. And you know, he's dealt with them, I've dealt with them, and having to sit and talk to these victims' families and tell them, I'm sorry, we haven't solved your son, daughter, whatever's death. You know, it's hard to do. And
we have to leave it there. Thank you both. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, the local response to climate change. Earlier this month, President Trump announced he would withdraw from the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord. In response, state and local governments across the nation have announced that they will still abide by the goals set by the agreement. Cities in Florida are part of that group, including Tampa, St. Pete, Sarasota, and Venice. Here is what some of you are saying about their action. Gary Morgan writes, it's good to see cities and states take matter into their own hands while the science-denying blowhards in Washington make cheap points with their ignorant base. David Stahl writes, I pity those who would actually worry and believe this nonsense. Must be hard carrying this angst around all the time. Much better to believe in unicorns. And Lorraine Levy writes, hey, you can inform, and if those folks want to remain ignorant and stubborn, areas that will eventually be underwater, we'll send life jackets or life vests. Well, what do you think about the backlogging cold cases in Palmetto? What more could be done to help police get justice for the families of these victims? Join tonight's conversation by visiting our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV and Amazon Fire and Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Chad Euler is a detective at the Palmetto Police Department, and James Lawrence is the former police commissioner for Nassau County in New York.